Ever wish you had a kind of cheat code for understanding something really complex?
Right.
Like instantly downloading a ton of knowledge.
Yeah, that feeling.
Well, that's sort of the spirit here at the Deep Dive. And today, we're actually tackling a fascinating request that came in from one of you.
Oh, interesting. What is it?
It's about exploring the prayer known as Aldar Alalo. That translates to the most elevated cycle.
Ah, yes. Also known as Isbi al-Wikoya.
Exactly, the prayer of protection. And it's attributed to the really renowned mystic Ibn Arab.
Right. And what's so compelling about this one is its staying power, the devotion it's inspired for, well, centuries.
So for this, we're leaning heavily on Suhataji Faruqi's work. It's pretty comprehensive.
It really is. She gives you the Arabic text, the translation, transliteration, but also this deep analysis of how it's been passed down and used over time. Her book really unpacks the whole journey of the prayer.
Exactly. So our goal today isn't just, read the prayer out loud.
No, definitely not.
We want to get into its significance, trace its path through history, different cultures, and explore the beliefs around its power.
Think of it as your express route, maybe, to getting a good handle on this really meaningful prayer.
Yeah, hopefully with some genuine aha moments, but without getting totally bogged down in every single detail.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive in. What is Aldar Alalo fundamentally?
Okay, so like you said, Aldar al-Alo means the most elevated cycle. And it's widely known as Yuzbi al-Koya, the prayer of protection.
Got it.
And a core belief around it is that if someone recites it with real sincerity and strong conviction while asking for something specific,
Yeah.
their wish is likely to be granted. That's the belief.
Okay, that sounds like it goes beyond just sort of routine recitation. Depends on something deeper. It's structured around divine names, isn't it? And these names hold specific power.
Precisely. Yeah, the structure revolves around a series of God's beautiful names, the Asma al-Husna, and each one is thought to hold unique secrets. They become particularly potent at certain points in the recitation. And underlying this, in Islamic theology, is the idea that these names aren't just labels. They represent God's attributes, how God manifests in creation.
Right.
But, like you hinted, the effectiveness is tied to the reciter's intention, their purity of heart.
So it's not just mechanical. It requires a certain inner state. Okay, let's clarify some terms. We've heard isbi and word. What do those mean here, and why is dar kind of special?
Good question. So isbi, the plural, is a zob, and word. They're often used pretty interchangeably. They refer to supererogatory liturgical formulas.
Meaning like voluntary prayers.
Exactly. Extra devotions people practice regularly. Now, dar, which means cycle or turn, that's less common for these kinds of prayers. But its use here in this prayer's name is actually quite significant.
How so? What does the cycle part imply?
Well, the understanding is that the dar in the name turns upon the name of God, the ever-exalted, the one from whom everything begins and ends.
Okay.
So the idea is that a prayer's secrets, its power, they continuously circulate with the person reciting it. They're always present in their life, day and night, in all situations.
I see.
And it's called most elevated
Little.
because of the abundant divine help and the profound secrets it's believed to hold.
That paints a picture of something really dynamic, almost all-encompassing. Now, the study, it doesn't just look at the prayer in isolation, does it? It traces its history. It has a lineage.
Absolutely. That's a crucial part of the research, tracing its long history and identifying key figures in its transmission. This happens through what are called iosa chains.
Yosa, that's like
Yeah.
authorization, right? Permission.
Exactly. Permission to transmit a text or a practice. And the study also looks at where this prayer is still actively used today, specifically focusing on places like Damascus, Istanbul, and even the UK.
So it's got deep roots, but it's still alive today.
It really resonates, yeah.
Okay, let's start in Damascus. How is Aldar Allah understood and used there?
Well, in Damascus, it's pretty accessible. Printed copies are easy to find. People from different backgrounds use it.
Right.
But the traditional Sufi way of passing it down through iwaza, that still happens in certain circles.
Sufism being the mystical side of Islam.
Yes, emphasizing personal experience, direct guidance from a teacher, a sheikh. And this iwaza is seen as a way to unlock the prayer's deeper spiritual power for the student, the murid.
And it offers protection, too.
That's a key aspect, yes, divine protection. And often the iwaza comes with specific instructions when to recite it, how often, tailored to the individual's spiritual level. Sometimes the sheikh is even said to receive these instructions in dreams.
Wow, really? That sounds incredibly personal. Are there examples of this kind of transmission in Damascus?
Yeah, the study mentions Ahmed Al-Nourn. He was a highly regarded figure who passed away in 1962. He gave iozas for this prayer to his students like Mamd al-Ghurab and Mamdi al-Nas.
And he gave specific instructions.
Often, yes. Sometimes these instructions even ended up in printed editions alongside Ibn Arab's daily prayers, the Arad. There's also a story about someone called Adnan, whose grandfather supposedly got direct spiritual instruction from Ibn Arab himself.
From Ibn Arabi, directly.
Well, in a spiritual sense, yes. To recite it twice daily or 3 times for important matters with specific recitations before and after.
So even with printed copies around, that authorized personal transmission still carries a lot of weight spiritually. What about Istanbul? Is it similar there?
In Istanbul, yes, the transmission through Iyaza continues, but maybe in more hidden Sufi networks.
Right.
A key example given is Sheikh Ahmed Yuflik, a Naqshbandi sheikh who died in 2001. He gave iyazas to his disciples and other Sufis in Istanbul, again with different advice on frequency, maybe twice a day, sometimes after the Irad, sometimes on its own. His own iyaza goes back through a Naqshbandi lineage.
It's amazing how these traditions persist, sometimes under the radar. Now, the UK, that's a really interesting place for this prayer to show up. How did it get to London?
Yeah, this part of the story is quite compelling. It arrived in the late 1960s with Bülent Rauf. He was a descendant of the Ottoman elite.
Okay.
His grandmother, Princess Fatma Hanem, had actually commissioned this beautiful, illuminated manuscript of the prayer back in the 1920s. And this specific copy became really central to what was known as the Bishara movement in the UK.
Bishara, what was that?
It was a movement led by Rauf, basically introducing Ibn Arab's teachings to a new generation of, spiritual seekers in the West.
And how did the prayer itself get into their hands, so to speak?
Well, the students in Bishara were really drawn to that manuscript of Princess Fatma's. They wanted it in a form they could actually recite.
Because they likely didn't read Arabic?
Many didn't know, so Rauf agreed, and it was transliterated, first, interestingly, into Hebrew by one student.
Hebrew.
Yeah, then into English, because standard Arabic transliteration wasn't widely known among them. Rauf later refined the English version, added the diacritics, and this version, along with the Arabic, was published in 1981 by the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society, MIAS.
Which grew out of Bishara.
Exactly, founded by people connected to it.
So, a practical need for recitation by non-Arabic speakers actually led to its wider spread in the West.
Yeah.
How's it typically used in the UK now?
Well, the MIS website suggests using it for protection, spiritual benefit. Often people carry it in microfiche form, like a personal amulet.
Microfiche? Wow.
Yeah. Or they display it in their homes. Some associated with the shore wear the microfiche in silver around their neck or put it above their front door.
And recitation.
Some recite it regularly. Others turn to it more specifically, in difficult times when they feel that need for divine protection.
It seems that core intention-seeking protection really travels across these different cultures and places, even if the methods change a bit. Okay, let's get into the specific properties and benefits. The Khawas, what does the study say about these?
Right, the Khawas is special properties. The study emphasizes they're activated through proper, sincere use. And there's a really detailed account from Al-Domen, a commentator from around the 18th, 19th centuries CE.
Okay, Al-Domen, what kinds of benefits did he link to the prayer? Give us some examples.
According to him, reciting it is believed to give you safety. Safety from enemies, people who might oppress you. And it helps foster respect, affection from others towards you.
Okay, relational benefits.
Yeah, and also protection from physical things, migraines, headaches, toothaches, stomach issues, quite a range. Plus, guarding against negative thoughts and bringing pleasant dreams.
That's a pretty broad list. But it's not just like a magic spell, right? There have to be conditions.
Absolutely not. The study really stresses this. Realizing these benefits depends entirely on the reciter's sincerity, their faithfulness, and a really firm inner belief in the prayer's power.
And doubt.
Doubt, on the other hand, could actually lead to distress. And this prayer, it's seen as part of a bigger picture of protective prayers in Islamic tradition. It's mentioned alongside other famous azab and urts.
Like fields or fortresses?
Kind of, yeah. Known for their protective qualities.
Yeah.
People even made talismans and magic squares from its verses to try and amplify that power.
Beyond actually reciting it, are there other ways people believe they can benefit?
Yes, definitely. Some believe just carrying the text brings benefits.
Just having it on you.
Yeah, and this even extends to the deceased. There's a suggestion that burying the text with someone can protect them from the torment of the grave.
Wow.
It's also thought to cultivate esteem, affection, encourage obedience from others, even help with business deals.
So worldly benefits too.
Yes. But for those on the Sufi path, it's seen more profoundly as a prayer of protection for one who strives for close friendship with God. Sincere individuals are said to have personally tried and tested its properties through their spiritual determination, their himma.
Himma, spiritual resolve.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's considered incredibly potent. Where does this perceived power come from?
The conviction is that the prayer is an eternal secret, like a sharp sword coming from the most secret of affairs, the divine realm. Its power is attributed to the specific Quranic verses and the beautiful names of God it contains. Those divine names are seen as the actual door, the keys to getting prayers answered.
And sincerity is the key to the key.
You could say that. Sincerity, purity of heart, absolutely essential. Now, some traditions do suggest needing permission, that iosa, from a knowledgeable guide, a murshid, to fully unlock its power.
Right.
But reciting it with pure intention is generally encouraged, even without that formal authorization.
Okay, so the text itself is central, drawing power from divine words. What about the actual content and structure? What's it like?
Well, the study approaches it as a text that's pretty stable, but with accepted variations. Due to oral transmission, personal preferences over centuries, it's not trying to create one single critical edition.
So there are different versions floating around.
Minor variations, yeah, even in the Quranic bits included. Some are legitimate alternative readings of the Quran. Others might just be small inaccuracies from copying or memory.
And how does the translation in the study handle the depth in the prayer?
It aims to go beyond just word for word. Especially with the Quranic verses and the divine names, it often elaborates to convey deeper meanings.
Okay.
For instance, more than a third of the Quranic content are direct divine addresses to prophets. Moses is addressed most often. And Ibn Arab's own understanding of the divine names, how they relate to divine need, how they're realized, how they manifest that, really informs the translation. Sometimes it means stretching the literal meaning a bit to capture the full theological weight.
Can you give an example of how it weaves these things together?
Sure. Verse 13 of the prayer, for instance, it incorporates part of a Quranic verse from the story of Joseph.
Prophet Joseph.
Yeah. The verse describes the impact of Joseph's incredible beauty on the women who saw him, including that shows how rich the composition is, the layers of meaning. The prayer starts naturally with the basmala, in the name of God, and the first verse seeks refuge in the ever-living, self-subsisting God. And throughout, you see themes of seeking refuge, asking for help, aiming for spiritual elevation. Verse 16, for example, quotes the Quran directly. So if they dispute with you, say, I have surrendered myself to Allah, it shows how it integrates scripture and direct address.
It sounds like a real tapestry of invocation in Scripture. Now, we talked about EOZ earlier.
Okay.
Can you expand on why these transmission networks are so important? How do they connect people to the prayer's blessings?
Right, the iosa. It's vital. It connects someone not just to the words on the page, but to the barakah, the spiritual blessing, the grace associated with the prayer. And ultimately, it connects them back to the author, Ibn Arab himself.
Like joining a chain.
Exactly. And the research shows these chains generally line up historically. The people involved, their connections, it makes sense chronologically, which supports their authenticity.
We also heard about child EOSA. That sounded a bit strange. Why would that happen?
Yeah, it is unusual. There are cases of iosas given to kids, sometimes really young ones. The thinking might be, well, a couple of things.
Okay.
First, shorter prayers like this might be relatively easy for kids to memorize, especially if they're already learning the Quran.
Makes sense.
Second, it could be about the parents wanting to place their child under the prayer's spiritual protection early on, to connect them to that blessing, that lineage, right from the start.
So establishing that spiritual connection and invoking blessings from day one, it seems like transmission is way more than just handing over a book.
Oh, absolutely. Getting an iosa means you're essentially joining a spiritual lineage. It traces back to the author, and it's kept alive through a living guide, a sheikh. You're participating in this inherited tradition. And remember, historically, these prayers were mainly oral.
Right, spoken performance.
Which makes that direct personal contact even more important in the transmission process.
And it seems this prayer wasn't just confined to one specific Sufi group.
That's right. While the chains show strong links to, say, the Naqshbandi and Qawwadi orders, especially from the 17th century on, Before that, it wasn't uncommon for people to have links to multiple Sufi paths, multiple
Why
arkas,
was this one so widespread?
probably because of Ibn Arab's huge spiritual stature that allowed the Dar to be used across different
Yeah.
groups. Interestingly, the study also notes times when Sufi and Salafi ideas kind of intersected among figures linked to the prayer, especially as Salafism became more prominent more recently.
Hmm.
And just the act of copying the text itself was often seen as a way to get baraka or to show love for the author, connect with their spirit.
And the EOS itself could take different forms.
Yeah, it wasn't always direct study. EOSs could be granted to unborn children or even through letters, correspondence. It shows how transmission adapted over time.
So this prayer has had this incredible journey through time across different spiritual traditions, carrying these deep beliefs about protection and spiritual power. It's clearly much more than just words on a page.
Absolutely. It's a living tradition. It embodies personal connection, striving for closeness to the divine, and that enduring human search for safety and meaning.
Okay, so for you, our listener, the learner here, let's quickly recap some key things about Al-Dar al-Allah. It acts as both a prayer for spiritual growth, for elevation, and as a potent form of protection.
That dual nature is really key.
It has this long, fascinating history of transmission, passed down through these authorized chains, the Ayoza, linking people to its spiritual blessing, its baraka, and back to Ibn Arab.
And the belief in its power is deeply tied to the sincerity of the person reciting it.
Right. And its journey through places like Damascus, Istanbul, the UK really highlights how relevant it remains across different times and cultures. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a much richer feel for it than just reading the text alone could.
And maybe this leaves you with a question to mull over. When you think about this prayer's long journey, how it's been interpreted and used in so many ways, what does its enduring popularity tell us about that fundamental human need? You know, the desire for connection, for protection, for spiritual meaning, especially in a world that feels like it's always changing.
A great question to ponder. Perhaps this encourages you to look further into Ibn Arabi's work or the broader world of Sufi traditions.